It's strange how betrayal never arrives with thunder. Sometimes it comes in daylight. Wearing a familiar voice, holding a coffee cup, pretending it's love. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a story like this one. It was a gray Tuesday morning when Laura showed up at my door. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, which usually meant everything in her world was running smoothly. But that day, when she stood on my porch with her coat half buttoned and eyes swollen from crying, I knew peace had finally cracked. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling, "I need your help. It's urgent." I motioned her inside. My coffee was still hot, the morning paper still folded on the table, and the house still smelled faintly of Grace's lavender soap. But the way Laura stood, clutching her purse like it contained all her fear, made the air heavy. She didn't sit. She paced the living room, glancing at the photos on the mantel, her childhood drawings, her mother's smile frozen in time. Finally, she turned to me. "Evan's in trouble? He made a mistake." I didn't speak. I'd learned long ago that silence makes the truth uncomfortable enough to reveal itself. She bit her lip, looked at the floor, then blurted out, "He owes a lot of money to people who won't wait much longer." "How much?" I asked quietly. Her shoulders stiffened. 120,000. The number didn't shock me. The tone did. She said it like someone reading a sentence they didn't understand. Like money wasn't real, just paper that kept other people from shouting. I leaned back in my chair. "And you want me to pay it?" She hesitated, then nodded. "He's been under so much stress, Dad. The business, it just collapsed. He trusted the wrong partner." I let her finish. Every sentence she spoke was wrapped in hope, that I'd interrupt and say yes, that I'd do what fathers are expected to do, rescue, forgive, and pretend. But the older you get, the more you realize love and rescue aren't the same thing. "Laura," I said softly, "you know I'm retired. My savings aren't what they used to be." Her eyes filled. "Dad, please, you're all we have." All. That word echoed like a bell in an empty church. When Grace passed 5 years ago, I promised myself I wouldn't let guilt buy me company. But hearing my daughter say, "You're all we have," tore at that promise like rust on steel. I walked to the window. Outside, the maple trees were bare, their branches black against the winter sky. For a moment I saw Grace's reflection in the glass. Gentle, knowing, disapproving, I turned back. "Where's Evan?" "At home," she whispered. "He couldn't face you." Of course he couldn't. Men like him never face the people who see through them. We sat in silence for nearly a minute. The clock ticked between us like a metronome marking regret. Then I asked, "Tell me the truth, Laura. Is this his first debt?" She hesitated. "No." "And the last one?" She looked down. "I don't know." That was enough of an answer. I'd spent a lifetime reading blueprints, measuring trust in inches and weight, but nothing I'd ever built had prepared me for the architecture of disappointment. The way lies fit together so tightly, you don't notice until the whole thing collapses. That evening, after she left, I went to the study, Grace's photograph watching from the desk. Her last words before the illness took her still whispered in my head, "Don't let our daughter trade peace for pride." I poured myself a drink and opened my ledger. My savings were modest, the house paid off, the workshop still functioning. I could have paid the debt. I could have bought silence again. But as I stared at the numbers, something inside me hardened. Not out of anger, but exhaustion. How many times had I tried to teach Laura that life's true wealth wasn't measured in what you keep, but in what you learn? And yet here she was, drowning in a man's mistakes, thinking money was oxygen. That night, I wrote a letter. No anger, no justification, just truth. "Laura, I love you more than the years that remain to me, but if I rescue you again, I'll steal your Chan. It's a peculiar feeling to erase your own presence. Most people leave without meaning to, through time, distance, or death. But to vanish by choice, that's something else. It's a quiet rebellion against everything that keeps you visible. When I left that night, I didn't look back at the house. Grace had once said that if you want to start over, never stare at what you're walking away from. It'll convince you to stay. The highway was empty, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through miles of dark farmland. I drove with the window cracked open, the cold air reminding me I was still alive, not running, just releasing. The stars above looked scattered and careless, like a blueprint no one had finished. By sunrise, I'd reached the outskirts of a small town I remembered from years ago. Willow Creek. Grace and I had driven here once during our anniversary trip, long before Laura met Evan. We stayed at a lakeside cabin, quiet and weathered, surrounded by pine and fog. I remembered it because she'd said something that now felt like prophecy. If we ever lose ourselves, let's hope we find a place that listens. And that's where I went. Back to the same cabin. Same creaky porch, same smell of pine and dust, same silence that forgave everything. The owner didn't recognize me, or maybe she pretended not to. I paid cash for a few months' stay and told her my name was Harrison. It felt strange to speak a name that wasn't mine, but also freeing, as if I'd stepped out of Henry Dawson's body for a while. The cabin was bare, just wood and wind. No pictures, no memories, just space. I spent the first day cleaning, fixing a broken hinge, lighting the old fireplace. When the flames caught, the smell of burning pine filled the room, and for a moment I felt Grace's hand in mine again. But by nightfall, reality settled in. I was gone, truly gone. No calls, no messages, no trace. I knew Laura would panic. She'd drive to my house, find the lights off, the car gone. She'd probably call the police, maybe even Evan's banker, hoping someone had heard from me. But the truth would come slowly, like a letter with no return address, and that was the point. My disappearance wasn't an escape. It was an education. 3 days passed before I saw my name on the news. Retired architect missing. Daughter appeals for help. A grainy photo of me flashed on the screen, one taken years ago, standing in front of my last project, smiling faintly beside Grace. The article quoted Laura. My father has been depressed since my mother's passing. We're afraid he might be in danger. Depressed. That word struck harder than any accusation could. I wasn't depressed. I was awake. But I suppose to people who live in noise, silence looks like sadness. Meanwhile, I had started keeping a small journal. Each entry began the same way. Day of learning what peace costs. On day 4, I wrote, Peace is expensive, but panic is cheaper. Most people pay with panic. On day 6, the phone stays off. The world hasn't ended. By the second week, the world had moved on, except for Laura. Through a neighbor's call I overheard on the radio, I learned she'd been visiting my lawyer, Clara Reeves, asking if I'd made a new will. That made me smile. Clara and I had spoken a week before my disappearance. She was one of the few people I trusted enough to tell the truth, or at least part of it. I'd left her a sealed envelope labeled, Deliver only when they stop pretending. The days grew longer, the nights quieter. Every evening I'd walk to the lake, toss a pebble, and watch the ripples fade. Each ring reminded me of consequence, how one small action can reach shores you'll never see. Sometimes I imagined Laura sitting at my empty dining table, staring at the empty chair. Evan would be pacing behind her, frustrated, angry, muttering about how selfish I was. He'd call me old-fashioned, stubborn, controlling. Men like him always mistake boundaries for weakness. But deep down, I knew this silence would start changing her. Pain first, then reflection, then understanding. One morning, while walking to the nearby store, I overheard 2 locals talking by a truck. Did you hear about that missing architect? His daughter's been offering a reward. The other man chuckled. Maybe he just didn't want to be found. I smiled under my breath. If only they knew how right he was. A few days later, as the first frost touched the trees, I received a letter at the cabin. No return address, just my real name in Laura's handwriting. Trembling, desperate, familiar, I opened it by the firelight. Dad, I don't understand. Why would you leave like this? Evan's been trying to fix things, but everything is falling apart. Please come home. I don't care about the money anymore. I just want to know you're safe. Love, Laura. I read it twice, then folded it carefully. There were no tears, just a long, slow ache. She was starting to see what I wanted her to see. That love built on convenience collapses the moment comfort is removed. I didn't write back, not yet. Sometimes silence teaches faster than words. That night, I sat on the porch with a lantern beside me, the wind carrying the smell of pine and frost. I thought about Grace again, her laugh, her letters, the way she used to hum when cooking. She would have understood this. She always believed love meant giving lessons that outlast you. As the stars brightened, I whispered, Grace, they'll find their way, but not through my wallet, through my absence. The night didn't answer, but the wind softened. It sounded a little like agreement. When you disappear on purpose, you imagine silence will follow you. But silence doesn't stay put. It echoes back through the places you leave behind. And sometimes the echo grows louder than your voice ever did. I learned that truth on the 3rd week of my disappearance. By then I had no contact with anyone. No phone, no cards, no trail. Yet hundreds of miles away, my home had turned into the epicenter of confusion, grief, and accusation. Laura had always hated the house after her mother died. Too quiet, she'd said. Too many memories sitting on shelves like ghosts. Now she walked through that same silence, but it wasn't grief that haunted her. It was absence. She told the police I'd never leave without telling her. They nodded politely, took a few notes, then told her what all officers tell families like mine. Sometimes people just need space. She didn't believe that. Neither did Evan, but for very different reasons. Evan's reasons were financial, not emotional. The day I vanished, he'd already been expecting my check. When I didn't show up or call, he must have panicked. Not about me, but about his deadlines. The kind of panic that smells like fear and unpaid loans. According to what I later learned from Clara, he and Laura went to my house within 48 hours of reporting me missing. They found the door unlocked, the room spotless, and the study nearly empty, except for one thing, a small envelope on my desk. It was sealed, unaddressed, but placed carefully on top of my old drafting table. Laura's trembling hands must have opened it, expecting a note, a clue, maybe a goodbye. Inside was a single piece of paper, one sentence. Not all debts are measured in money. No signature, no explanation. Evan reportedly cursed when he read it. Laura, though, just sank into the chair and wept. She recognized my handwriting, and worse, she recognized my silence. From the porch window of my cabin, I imagined her reaction vividly. I knew her heartbeat, the way guilt would rise, then retreat under denial. And I knew Evan's arrogance, the way he'd twist my message into a personal insult. He'd think I was mocking him. He'd call it pride. But it wasn't pride. It was mercy, the kind that looks cruel until it teaches. By the end of that week, my lawyer, Clara Reeves, received her cue. She had been holding a sealed folder titled Contingency Dawson Estate, Case 3. Inside it were detailed instructions. Hold delivery until confirmed disappearance exceeds 2 weeks. Contact Laura privately, not Evan. Deliver in person. And so she did. She visited them at the house that Friday evening. Laura, eyes swollen from days of crying, opened the door. Evan stood behind her, pretending concern. Clara was calm, the kind of calm that makes guilty people nervous. I'm sorry for your loss, she said gently, though I wasn't lost, just elsewhere. I have a message from your father. Laura's lips parted, her breath catching. He's alive? I'm afraid I don't know, Clara replied, but he left this for you. She handed her the sealed document, my handwriting again, familiar and deliberate. Laura clutched it like it was fragile glass. Evan snatched it from her, trying to tear it open, but Clara stopped him. "It's addressed to your wife, not you." Then she turned and left, her footsteps echoing on the old porch floorboards. I later imagined the sound of paper unfolding in that house, the smell of dust, the faint ticking of the clock, and my daughter's voice reading words she didn't expect. "Laura, if you're reading this, I've already gone where peace still speaks. I didn't leave out of anger, but out of hope. The kind a father keeps long after his child stops listening. You've spent your life saving people from consequences. Now you must learn how to save yourself. When you're ready, look beneath what's left behind. You'll find the truth, not the comfort." Dad. There was more, but that part stayed sealed, for her eyes only. I'd hidden something inside the study long before I left, a small metal key taped beneath Grace's photograph frame. It opened the drawer of my old tool cabinet, where I'd kept a separate ledger, not of money, but of names and notes. Inside that drawer, she'd find something else, something only Grace and I had understood, a blueprint folded in half, labeled Project Mercy. It wasn't a design for a building. It was for a life I'd planned long before Evan's death, something that would reveal what value truly meant. While they unraveled my mystery, I lived quietly in Willow Creek. Each morning began with coffee and the slow hum of wind across the lake. I'd read the newspaper in the diner, nod politely to locals who didn't know my name. Sometimes I even laughed again. Small, unhurried laughter, like I was relearning how to breathe. But at night, I'd think about Laura. Her confusion, her pain, the way she'd start piecing together her father's absence like a riddle she couldn't afford to ignore. People learn best when the lesson costs them something. And for Laura, the price was comfort. Meanwhile, Evan grew restless. He started calling banks, lawyers, and even my old colleagues, pretending to be next of kin. But none of them gave him what he wanted, because my finances were already moved into something new, somewhere beyond his reach. By the end of that month, he began to unravel. His partners withdrew, his reputation soured, and his calls turned desperate. That was when my silence stopped being inconvenient and started being powerful. Every man who hides behind others eventually runs out of shadows. From the outside, it might have looked cruel, a father abandoning his daughter. But from where I sat, staring at the calm lake reflecting the stars, it looked like something else entirely, a test of character, carved in patience and love. And though I couldn't see her, I felt it, a shift somewhere out there in the world. Maybe a tear shed for understanding, not loss. Maybe the first tiny crack in the wall of denial. That's the thing about building people. Sometimes you have to tear down the structure before they realize how strong the foundation really was. I've learned that truth doesn't knock politely. It waits until you're comfortable, and then it kicks in the door. That's what happened 2 weeks after my disappearance. By then, Laura had stopped crying in public. She'd begun visiting my house each morning, sitting in my old study, waiting for some kind of sign, a clue that would explain everything. Evan, on the other hand, had grown meaner, angrier, restless like a man watching his own life collapse from the inside. He'd called every friend, every bank, every contact, hoping someone would say I'd been seen, but no one had, because I had vanished too quietly, too completely, and that quiet was starting to get expensive. One evening around 7, Laura was home alone when she heard the knock, a hard one. 3 sharp raps, no pause, the kind that doesn't wait for welcome. She told the police later she thought it was a neighbor, but it wasn't. 2 men stood on her porch. Both wore long coats despite the mild weather. One had a scar along his cheek. The other smiled too easily, like he'd practiced it in a mirror. "Mrs. Morris?" the taller one asked. "Yes," she said, stepping back slightly. He smiled wider. We're friends of your husband's. Mind if we come in? Her instinct said no, but politeness said yes. And politeness, I've noticed, is how good people get trapped. When Evan came downstairs, his face went white. He knew those men. He'd met them weeks before. Men who didn't wear ties, didn't keep offices, didn't send reminder emails. They were the kind of men who didn't believe in second chances. Evening, gentlemen, he said, forcing a laugh. This isn't a great time. It's never a great time, the scarred one replied. But you see, Mr. Morris, time's kind of what you've run out of. Laura stood between them, confused. What's going on? Evan's jaw tightened. It's nothing. A misunderstanding. But the shorter man chuckled. A misunderstanding that's now worth $150,000 with interest. Laura turned to him, horrified. 100 and... Evan, I thought... He cut her off. Laura, please, not now. But it was already too late. The men stepped closer. The taller one lowered his voice. Your father was supposed to take care of this, he said quietly. And since he didn't, well, we're here to collect. I can only imagine what Laura felt in that moment. Fear, betrayal, maybe the slow, dawning realization that the man she defended had been using her, not loving her. The men didn't hurt them. They didn't need to. They just made it clear that money talks louder than family. Before leaving, one of them placed a card on the mantel. Black, embossed, no logo, just a phone number. Call when you're ready, he said, or we'll call you. When they left, the silence in that house must have felt colder than winter. Meanwhile, at the cabin, I was sitting by the fireplace, reading a letter I'd written but hadn't sent. It wasn't to Laura, it was to Grace. I wrote to her often, not because I expected an answer, but because it helped me stay human. Grace, I wrote, our daughter's learning what debt really is. It isn't about money. It's about trust. Every lie is a kind of loan you take from someone's heart, and one day it comes due. I sealed the letter, placed it in a drawer, and watched the fire crackle. I could almost hear her voice whisper, You're doing what I couldn't. You're letting her grow by falling. Still, my chest ached. Love and punishment never sit comfortably together. The next morning, I walked into town. At the diner, I picked up the local paper, and there it was again. Missing architect's family under pressure. There was a photo of Laura outside my house, talking to a police officer, her face pale and weary. Behind her, Evan stood in the background, avoiding the camera. The caption said, Family refuses to speculate on motive for disappearance. But the photograph told its own story. Her eyes weren't just tired, they were opening. That afternoon, I took a long walk by the lake, the cold air sharp enough to sting. I started thinking about how much Grace would have hated this. Not the silence, but the suffering. She'd always been softer than me, always believing people could change if you just loved them long enough. But love without consequence is just indulgence. And indulgence is how you lose respect, one small compromise at a time. I had chosen a harder kind of love, the kind that teaches by absence. It was cruel, yes, but it was honest. 2 days later, Clara called from a secure line, one we'd agreed upon before I disappeared. She didn't ask where I was. She didn't need to. I delivered the letter, she said. And Henry, they're cracking. Evan's lies are coming undone. The collectors visited. I said nothing. She exhaled slowly. You understand they might come after Laura again, right? She's frightened. I closed my eyes. Fear is a good teacher, Clara. But if they cross the line, I trust you'll know what to do. I'll handle it, she said. But Henry, don't wait too long. Silence teaches, yes, but too much of it breaks. Her voice lingered after she hung up, and I sat there listening to the fire, wondering if I was breaking something I couldn't fix. Back in the city, Laura began packing some of Evan's things. She didn't say it out loud, but she knew. Love doesn't look like fear. Evan tried to stop her, begged, shouted, blamed me, blamed Grace, blamed the world. But Laura didn't shout back. She just whispered, "Dad's gone because of you." That was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment denial turned into truth. Painful, irreversible, necessary truth. Sometimes to rebuild a family, you have to burn the scaffolding. And as I looked at the quiet reflection of the lake that night, I realized something simple yet brutal. The man I was teaching wasn't Evan. It was Laura. She was finally learning the hardest equation of love, that the people who truly care for you don't always say. It's strange how houses remember things. Even when you clear the rooms and lock the doors, they hold on to whispers, to fingerprints, to the weight of secrets left behind. That's what my old home had become, a quiet vault, waiting for someone to listen. After the visit from the loan sharks, Laura stopped sleeping. She told herself it was worry, but it was guilt, a slow ache that doesn't throb, it lingers. She spent her days pacing between the kitchen and my study, the one place in that house where my presence still hung in the air. Evan had moved out temporarily, claiming he needed to sort things. In truth, he was hiding. Cowards rarely leave because of courage. They leave because they've run out of people to deceive. The morning she found the ledger, it was raining. Soft, steady, like the world was cleansing something she couldn't name. She'd gone into the study for the 100th time, brushing dust off my drafting table, running her fingers over the grooves my tools had left in the wood. She looked at the framed photo of Grace, tilted slightly forward, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she straightened it. That's when she noticed the faint strip of tape under the frame. Her breath caught. She lifted it carefully, revealing a small metal key, the same one I had left weeks before. It was cold against her skin, old brass, edges worn smooth from years in my pocket. Attached to it was a note in my handwriting. "Use this when you're ready to see, not just look." Her pulse quickened. She turned slowly toward the tool cabinet near the wall. Heavy, iron, the same one I'd used for decades to store my drafting supplies. The lock fit perfectly. When she turned the key, it clicked with a sound that seemed louder than thunder. Inside, she found a small wooden box, an old ledger, and a single sealed envelope labeled Project Mercy. I can imagine her trembling hands as she opened the box. Inside were not documents or deeds, but small folded papers, each marked with a name. Every name was someone I had helped quietly over the years. The carpenter whose house I rebuilt after a fire. The student whose tuition I paid without revealing my name. The widow I sent monthly groceries to after her husband's illness. Each paper held a simple note, my handwriting neat and firm. Paid, not in money, but in gratitude. Laura must have read through them slowly, confusion twisting into awe. Her father, the man she thought was living modestly, had been quietly building something no one knew about, a map of kindness disguised as bookkeeping. Then she opened the ledger. It wasn't financial either. No columns of numbers, no balances, no debt. Just phrases, quotes, thoughts. Things I'd learned after Grace's passing. Things I'd written down to keep myself human. On the first page, forgiveness is the only currency that never loses value. On another, you can't rescue people who enjoy drowning. And then, near the middle, Project Mercy begins when selfishness ends. But it was the last page that stopped her cold. There in bold ink was a line addressed to her by name. Laura, if you're reading this, then you've reached the part where love must stop feeling good and start meaning something. You were raised to be kind, not blind. The man you married sees money as rescue. I see mercy as strength. If you wish to know where the truth begins, follow your mother's handwriting. Her hands shook. She turned the envelope labeled Project Mercy over and noticed the faintest pencil mark on the back. Grace T. Her mother's initials. She opened it. Inside was a letter, written years ago in Grace's delicate handwriting. A letter Laura had never seen before. My dear Laura, if life ever feels too heavy, remember this. Your father doesn't fix things because he wants control. He fixes them because he believes things worth saving shouldn't break twice. But when the time comes, you must learn the difference between being rescued and being restored. Love is not owed, it's earned. Tears blurred her vision as she read it again and again, her mother's voice echoing in every word. For the first time, she didn't just miss her parents. She understood them. At that same hour, miles away in Willow Creek, I felt something shift inside me. A calm I couldn't explain, maybe intuition, maybe the invisible thread that ties family together, even when stretched thin by distance and pain. I sat by the lake and wrote another entry in my journal. Day 31, she's beginning to see. Guilt is a terrible teacher, but understanding is the graduation. That evening, Laura drove alone to my workshop on the edge of town, the one place I hadn't touched since Grace's death. The doors were still locked, the lights off, but she had the keys. Inside, everything smelled the same. Sawdust, oil, faint lavender. She ran her hand over the old table where I used to draw and noticed another envelope tucked beneath the corner of a blueprint. When mercy becomes strength, follow the sound of forgiveness. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she would, soon, because everything I left behind was leading her somewhere, not to my money, to my meaning. That night, as rain poured against the cabin windows, I thought of Laura again, the little girl who once sat on my lap while I sketched rooftops. She used to say, "Daddy, you make houses. I want to make hearts." And now, in a way I never expected, she was finally learning to. When you build houses long enough, you start to see the same flaw everywhere, not in the walls, but in the people who live inside them. They patch cracks instead of fixing the foundation. That's what my daughter had been doing with her life, sealing over damage that needed rebuilding. By the time Clara Reeves called Laura, nearly a month had passed since my disappearance. The storm of panic had quieted into confusion. The police had stopped searching. Neighbors whispered condolences as if I were already gone. But Laura, for the first time in her life, wasn't chasing noise. She was listening to silence. She had found my ledger, my wife's letter, and the faint trail I'd left behind, but she hadn't yet found the reason. That's where Clara came in. Clara and I had worked together for years. She'd seen my best buildings rise, my worst heartbreaks fall, and she'd been there the night Grace died, the night I promised to build something that couldn't be taken by greed. When I left, she was the only one I trusted with my last blueprint. So when she called Laura and asked to meet, it wasn't coincidence. It was part of the plan. Laura met her at a quiet cafe downtown. The place was almost empty, the kind of setting where truth doesn't have to shout. Rain streaked the windows. Traffic hummed faintly outside. "Mrs. Reeves," Laura said nervously, "you said you had something from my father?" Clara smiled softly. "Call me Clara. Your father and I go back a long way." From her briefcase, she withdrew a thick brown envelope tied with twine. On the front, in my handwriting, "Deliver when she begins to understand." Laura's eyes welled up. "How did you know when that was?" "I didn't," Clara said, "but Henry did. He always did." Laura untied the string with trembling fingers. Inside were several documents, a sealed letter, and a thin silver flash drive. On the top page was my handwriting again, neat and deliberate. Project Mercy, final draft. Clara leaned back, letting her read. The first few pages weren't about money. They were about people. Design sketches, maps, lists of materials, handwritten notes. At first, it looked like another architectural project, until she noticed the annotations. Each section carried a name she recognized from the ledger: widows, single parents, veterans, students, every soul I had quietly helped. Beside each name, coordinates and notes in my handwriting. Home site, Phase 1. Community Workshop, Phase 2. Education Wing, Phase 3. Her lips parted. He was building something. Clara nodded. Yes, not a building, a legacy. The flash drive held photos, aerial shots of land near Willow Creek, architectural renderings, permits signed months before my disappearance. The property had already been transferred into a trust, not under my name, but Grace's. The Grace Turner Foundation for Restorative Living. Clara explained softly, Your father used his retirement, his savings, even the proceeds from selling one of his patents, all to build this, a place where people can rebuild, not be rescued. Laura pressed her hand to her mouth, her tears falling quietly. He told me he didn't have much left. Clara's gaze softened. He didn't lie. He just meant he didn't have much left for greed. In that moment, I imagined her sitting there, shoulders trembling, trying to hold on to her composure while the truth kept slipping through her fingers. She must have realized I hadn't abandoned her. I had simply chosen to show her a kind of love that couldn't be cashed or stolen. The sealed letter inside the envelope was next, her name written in the center. She opened it slowly. My dearest Laura, by now you've seen what I've been building. It isn't for you to inherit. It's for you to understand. Every act of help I ever gave was not charity. It was architecture. I built people the way I built houses, one foundation at a time. But what you inherit is far greater than money. You inherit the chance to become what your mother was, the quiet strength that rebuilds without resentment. Evan's debt was never yours to carry. Mercy, when mistaken for weakness, becomes servitude. Come find me, not for closure, but for conversation. If you follow the blueprint marked Phase 3, you'll find the place I've been calling home. Dad, Clara didn't speak as Laura finished reading. When she finally looked up, her face was streaked with tears, but her voice was steady. He's alive. Yes, Clara said, and waiting for you. But he wanted you to arrive as his equal, not his dependent. Laura nodded slowly, folding the letter carefully, as if afraid it might break. For the first time since I'd left, she looked less like a daughter searching for rescue and more like a woman discovering her purpose. That evening I stood outside the cabin, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The air smelled like rain and pine, the kind of scent that carries memory in it. My phone buzzed once, the encrypted number I'd given Clara. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She had kept her promise. The letter had been delivered, and somewhere out there my daughter had begun her journey, not to find me, but to find herself. As twilight deepened, I thought of Grace again. She would have smiled at all of this. Not the plan, not the secrecy, but the result. She'd once told me, real inheritance isn't money or property. It's wisdom that outlives you. That's what Project Mercy was, a structure built not from concrete, but from understanding. Every nail was forgiveness, every wall a boundary, every door an invitation to rebuild. I closed my journal that night with a final line. Mercy is the only architecture strong enough to house love. And as the stars shimmered over the quiet lake, I felt something ease inside me. Not victory, peace. The road to Willow Creek had always been quiet. Long stretches of pine and maple, broken only by the hum of tires over wet asphalt. I used to drive that route with Grace every autumn. She'd roll down the window, let the wind toss her hair, and point out the color changes on the trees like they were brush strokes in a painting. Now that same road carried my daughter toward the life her mother once dreamed of. I didn't know exactly when Laura would arrive, only that she would. When a person begins to see truth, distance doesn't slow them down. It draws them closer. That morning I woke early before sunrise. The lake was a mirror, still silver, perfect. I brewed a pot of coffee and stood on the cabin's porch, waiting for the first sound of tires on gravel. It didn't take long. A car appeared between the trees, headlights cutting through mist. It stopped at the gate, the new one I'd built myself, bearing a small metal sign. Grace Turner Foundation, Rebuilding Lives with Dignity. Laura sat inside for several minutes before stepping out. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from realization, the kind that settles deep in your chest when you finally understand how wrong you were. She walked slowly through the gate, across the gravel path, her shoes crunching on the stones. Every step she took was a conversation, not between us, but between her and the silence she'd once blamed me for. The foundation wasn't grand, not in the way money builds. It was humble. 2 cottages by the lake, a small workshop, and a main building made from reclaimed timber and glass. But it breathed. Every beam, every window, every garden bed had a story. Children's drawings lined the hallway walls. Laughter echoed faintly from the dining area. It smelled of fresh bread and sawdust, the scent of beginnings. She stopped just inside the doorway, eyes wide. A woman greeted her with a smile. "Are you Mrs. Morris?" Laura nodded. "Your father said you might come." Those words broke her. I watched from the workshop window, unseen, as she walked through the halls I'd designed, the same halls Grace had described in her journals. Every corner of that place carried her influence, the color of the curtains, the design of the kitchen, even the garden layout, circular, not linear, because Grace had believed that healing never moves in straight lines. Laura paused by a wall of framed photographs. Each one showed a different family, a different story, and beneath each was a small plaque that read, "Rebuilt through Project Mercy." She touched one of the frames, a young mother with 2 children. Tears welled in her eyes. That's when I stepped out from the workshop doorway. She didn't see me at first. When she turned and our eyes met, time seemed to stall. Her lips parted, her breath caught, the kind of pause that carries years inside it. "Dad," she whispered. I smiled softly. "You found it." She took a step forward, then another, and then she was in my arms, sobbing against my chest. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Words couldn't compete with what silence had already said. When she finally pulled back, her voice was small but steady. "I thought you were gone." "I was," I said quietly, "just not in the way you think." We sat on the porch overlooking the lake, 2 mugs of coffee between us. The sun had risen by then, painting everything gold. Laura looked out at the water. "Mom's name, it's everywhere here." I nodded. "Because it's her spirit that built this. I just followed the blueprint she left behind." She turned to me. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because some things can't be told, Laura. They have to be lived. If I'd tried to explain, you'd have thought I was being dramatic or cruel. You needed to see what debt does to people, how it eats the soul, not just the wallet." She looked down, ashamed. "You were right about Evan." "I wasn't right," I said gently. "I was just earlier." She smiled faintly, wiping her eyes. "So this place? You built it all by yourself?" I shook my head. "Not alone. Clara helped with the legal side. A few volunteers helped with construction. And the people I once helped, they came back to return the favor." She tilted her head. "The ones from the ledger?" "Yes. Every paid-in gratitude note turned into a pair of hands that helped me finish this. The same people I once rescued are now rescuing others." She took a deep breath. "It's beautiful. It's mercy," I said simply, "and mercy, when practiced, builds its own walls." We spent the rest of the day walking the property. Laura met the families living there, the children playing by the lake, the volunteers teaching classes. Everywhere she turned, she saw pieces of me and her mother, not in words or portraits, but in deeds. When we reached the small chapel by the water, she stopped at the entrance. There, carved above the door, were Grace's own words. "Love is the only structure that survives the storm." Her hands trembled as she touched the letters. I saw the moment her grief turned into something softer. Gratitude. Not for the money, not for the lessons, but for the legacy she finally understood she was part of. That evening we sat by the lake again, the water glowing orange under the sunset. She turned to me. "What happens now?" I smiled. "Now you help me run this place, and one day you'll lead it." "Me?" she said, surprised. "Yes. You've always had your mother's heart. You just had to find the courage to use it." She laughed softly, tears glimmering in her eyes. "I think I'm finally ready, Dad." That night, long after she'd gone to her guest cottage, I sat alone on the porch. The stars reflected on the water. I thought of Grace, her laughter, her quiet wisdom, her belief that love was meant to be built, not bought. And for the first time in years, I whispered into the night, "We did it, Grace. She's home." Silence has its own kind of gravity. If you hold it long enough, people start to hear their own echoes inside it. For months, I'd used silence as a scalpel. Sharp, deliberate, cutting away the rot of entitlement that had poisoned my daughter's marriage. But sometimes, when the lesson begins to take root, the person who fears silence most finds his way back to it. That's how Evan Morris found me. It was a quiet afternoon at the foundation. Laura was leading a class in the workshop, teaching 2 single mothers how to restore furniture for resale. The smell of varnish mixed with fresh bread from the kitchen. The air felt whole, alive. I was reviewing plans for an expansion to the garden area when a car door slammed outside. Through the office window I saw him, unshaven, thinner, and wearing a suit that looked borrowed. Evan, the man who'd once strutted through my house with confidence, now stood hesitating at the gate of the foundation that bore my late wife's name. He looked smaller somehow, as if arrogance had leaked out of him over time. I stepped outside slowly. He froze when he saw me. His mouth opened, then closed again. "Henry," he said finally, his voice hoarse, "you're alive." "I was always alive," I replied quietly. "You just stopped looking in the right places." He ran a trembling hand through his hair. I need to talk to you." We sat on a bench near the lake. He kept glancing at the water, unable to meet my eyes for long. When he finally spoke, the mask was gone. "I lost everything," he said. "The business collapsed. The creditors. They came after me. I thought you'd help. I thought you owed me that much after all the years I—" He stopped himself mid-sentence, realizing how foolish the word sounded now. "Owe?" I said softly. "Evan, you married my daughter, not my wallet." He swallowed hard. "I know that now. I didn't know how deep I was in. I made deals I couldn't get out of. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out." "By borrowing more?" I asked. He nodded, shame written across his face. "I kept thinking one more loan would save me, but every promise I made was another chain." We sat in silence for a while. The sound of children laughing carried from the workshop. He stared at them. The life he could have had if he'd valued what mattered. "I came here because Laura won't see me," he said finally. "She says she's done." "She's not done," I said quietly. "She's healing. And sometimes healing looks like distance." He looked at me then, desperate. "Can you talk to her for me? Tell her I've changed? Have you?" He hesitated. "I'm trying." "Trying isn't the same as changing," I said. "Trying is what people do when they want forgiveness without responsibility." He clenched his fists. "You don't understand what it's like to lose everything." I turned toward him slowly. "You're wrong, Evan. I lost your mother-in-law to cancer. I lost years of peace to regret. I know exactly what it's like to lose everything. The difference is I learned from it. You spent your losses making excuses." He went silent. For the first time since I'd known him, Evan didn't argue. I stood up, motioning toward the main building. "Walk with me." He followed quietly. Inside, he saw the families rebuilding their lives. People once broken by debt, abandonment, or loss. Volunteers were sanding furniture, painting walls, teaching trade skills. Everywhere he looked, he saw purpose where he'd once seen profit. "What is this place?" he asked softly. "This," I said, "is what debt looks like when it's repaid in compassion. Every person here was helped by someone who owed them nothing." We stopped near a bulletin board covered with photographs. At the top, a sign read, "From Burden to Builder." Evan's eyes scanned the board, then froze on one picture. Laura, smiling, teaching a group of children. Below it, a small plaque. Program Director, Laura Dawson. He stared at it for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice broke. "She looks happy." "She is," I said, "because she stopped waiting for someone to save her." He nodded slowly, tears welling. "I didn't deserve her." "No," I said gently, "but you still have the choice to become someone who might." He wiped his eyes. "Is that even possible?" "It is," I said, "but not here. This place isn't for those who want redemption given. It's for those who earn it." He looked confused. "Then why let me come?" "Because mercy doesn't mean comfort, Evan. It means offering someone the chance to face themselves without hatred." I handed him a small envelope from my pocket. Inside was a card, the contact of a rehabilitation program that partnered with the foundation. "Go there," I said. "Work. Rebuild. Learn what real worth feels like." He stared at it, then at me. "And if I do?" "Then maybe," I said, "you'll stop needing money to measure who you are." He nodded slowly, stood up, and extended his hand. For the first time, it wasn't the grip of a con man or a beggar. It was the handshake of a man learning humility. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For not hating me?" I smiled faintly. "You're not worth hating, Evan. You're worth forgiving." He turned, walked to his car, and drove away. And as the dust settled behind him, I felt something I hadn't in years. Closure. That evening, Laura found me on the porch. "Was that Evan's car?" "Yes." She hesitated. "What did he want?" "To say goodbye," I said simply. She nodded slowly, no anger, no bitterness, just quiet understanding. "Did you forgive him?" she asked. "I did," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means I'm done carrying him." She smiled faintly. "Then I think I can forgive him too." The sun dipped below the trees, casting a golden reflection on the water. In that moment, I realized the lesson was complete. Not revenge, not punishment, just truth, absorbed, accepted, and finally lived. For years, I thought my silence was the punishment. Now I saw it for what it really was. The doorway to mercy. The older I get, the more I realize the past doesn't knock. It just walks in when you least expect it. I'd spent months building peace out of silence, piece by piece. Laura was thriving, Evan was gone, and the foundation was beginning to grow into something self-sustaining. But peace has a funny way of attracting trouble. The trouble came dressed in a gray suit. It was a Tuesday morning when Clara arrived at the foundation unannounced. She never looked nervous, not even in court. But that day her eyes carried a tension I hadn't seen before. We sat across from each other in my office, sunlight slanting through the blinds. "I had a visitor at the firm," she said. I leaned back slowly. "What kind of visitor?" She opened her briefcase and placed a single business card on my desk. Black, embossed, no logo, just a name. Samuel Cole. That name had history. He was the banker who'd once funded Evan's ventures, the man who turned debt into a weapon who profited off other people's desperation. "What did he want?" I asked. "To talk about you," she said. "Apparently he's been following your little foundation project. He believes you used money that once passed through his institution. He's hinting at a claim." I smiled faintly. "Of course he is." Clara frowned. "Henry, he's not like the others. This man doesn't chase money. He chases control." That evening, after the volunteers left, I stayed in the office, reading through old paperwork. Samuel Cole had a reputation. Charming, ruthless, patient. He didn't just collect debts. He collected obedience. And now it seemed he'd decided I owed him something. I knew what was coming. People like Cole never forget the scent of unfinished business. Sure enough, 2 days later, his car pulled up the gravel road to the foundation. A black sedan polished to a mirror shine. He stepped out like he was arriving at a corporate gala. Crisp suit, silver cufflinks, smile too practiced to be human. "Mr. Dawson," he greeted, extending a hand. "Pleasure to finally meet the man turning my old accounts into charity." I shook his hand, feeling the chill behind his charm. "Mr. Cole, you've come a long way for a handshake," he chuckled. "Oh, I came for more than that." "May I?" He gestured toward the porch. I nodded. We sat opposite each other, the lake glinting behind him. He leaned back casually. "You've built something impressive here, though I must admit it's strange, using funds once tied to my bank for whatever this is." "It's called rebuilding lives," I said. "Something your line of work doesn't often encourage." He smirked. "Ah, morality. The currency of those who can afford regret. I've read about you. Architect, widower, retired early, vanished mysteriously, reappears with a foundation under his late wife's name. Sounds poetic, almost too poetic." "Truth tends to sound that way," I said calmly. He leaned forward. "Let's not pretend you're untouchable, Henry. Evan Morris took substantial loans from my institution. You were his guarantor on 2 of them. Your disappearance triggered a debt investigation, and while you were hiding, those loans defaulted." I said nothing. "So technically," he continued, "you owe me roughly $162,000. I smiled faintly. "Money I never borrowed. Paper you forged through manipulation." His grin widened. "Details. What matters is perception. And perception, my friend, is leverage." I studied him quietly. He reminded me of the men I'd dealt with my entire career, people who believed power was the same as permanence. I'd built towers for men like him once, and watched them crumble when the foundation cracked. "Tell me something, Mr. Cole," I said softly. "How much money is enough?" He paused, surprised by the question. "Enough?" he repeated. "Enough doesn't exist. There's only more." "And that," I said, "is why men like you will never be satisfied. You mistake ownership for purpose." He chuckled. "You mistake comfort for wisdom. You think you've outgrown the system, but you're still part of it. You're just building a prettier cage." "Maybe," I said, "but at least people can breathe in mine." His expression tightened. "You're not as harmless as you pretend," he said finally. "I could make life very difficult for you. Audits, tax reviews, reputation damage. All very legal." I stood slowly. "Then do it. But remember, every threat you make leaves a record, and records have a funny way of turning into headlines. I may be old, Mr. Cole, but I'm not powerless." He smirked, rising to his feet. "We'll see." He turned to leave, but stopped, halfway down the steps. "By the way," he said over his shoulder, "tell your daughter she's very photogenic. The newspapers love a redemption story, especially when it ends with a scandal." And then he was gone. I stood there for a long time after his car disappeared, feeling that old familiar fire stirring in my chest. Not anger, purpose. Grace used to say, "The only way to fight greed is to build something it can't buy." She was right. Samuel Cole could take my peace, my comfort, maybe even my finances, but he couldn't take what I'd already given away. Meaning. That night, I called Clara. "Tell him if he wants a fight," I said quietly. "He'll get one, but not in court. In the court of conscience." She smiled through the phone. "Then we'll need witnesses." "We already have them," I said. "Every soul this foundation rebuilt." The next morning, the foundation buzzed with activity. I gathered the volunteers and explained the situation. To my surprise, they didn't panic. They rallied. One of them, an ex-teacher I'd helped years ago, said, "If he tries to take this place, we'll show him what mercy builds." And in that moment, I realized something beautiful. This wasn't my burden anymore. The people I once saved were now standing guard over the home they'd helped create. Debt, in every sense, had finally been paid. Grace used to say, "You can't outshout greed, Henry. You outlive it." I never truly understood that until the day Samuel Cole tried to turn my silence into scandal. He thought mercy was weakness. He was about to learn it was endurance. It began with whispers. Local journalists started calling Clara's office, asking for comments about a possible misuse of funds at the Grace Turner Foundation. A few days later, a headline appeared online. Mysterious retired architect's charity under scrutiny. Family debt at the core. Cole's fingerprints were all over it. He hadn't come for money. He came for dignity. And when a man can't control your wallet, he'll try to stain your name. I read the article twice, then folded it neatly and placed it aside. I'd been attacked before, professionally, socially, morally, but never for something that mattered this much. This time, the target wasn't me. It was the idea that mercy could be stronger than greed. Laura stormed into my office, furious. "Dad, he's lying. The paper says you used stolen funds. They're quoting his bank reports." I looked up from my desk. "Laura, calm down." "Calm down? He's dragging Mom's name through the dirt." Clara, standing near the window, said quietly, "That's exactly what he wants. He expects outrage. He expects us to panic." Laura turned to me. "So what do we do?" I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the volunteers working in the garden below. They didn't know about the article yet. They were still planting, laughing, living. Proof that goodness, when practiced daily, doesn't flinch at gossip. "We tell the truth," I said, "but not to him, to everyone." That afternoon, Clara made a few calls. By the next morning, the foundation hall was filled with reporters, local officials, and the people who'd been part of Project Mercy since the beginning. I hadn't faced an audience like that in years, not since my days unveiling skyscraper designs. But this wasn't about architecture. It was about what holds people up when everything else collapses. Clara opened the press conference. "Mr. Dawson has no prepared statement," she said. "He will simply tell you what this place really is." The room quieted as I stepped forward. "I was an architect for 50 years, I began, my voice steady. "I built structures meant to last lifetimes. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that the strongest foundations aren't made of steel or concrete. They're made of people." I glanced at Laura, who was standing near the back, her hands clasped tightly. "When my wife Grace passed away, I thought everything I built had lost its meaning. Then I realized meaning isn't something you keep. It's something you give. This foundation isn't a front for money. It's a front row seat to what mercy can rebuild when money fails." I paused. The cameras clicked softly. Yes, my son-in-law made mistakes. Yes, I was his guarantor. And yes, I disappeared. Not out of guilt, but out of grief. I wanted to understand why people confuse debt with worth. What I learned was simple. Mercy doesn't erase mistakes. It transforms them. Cole had slipped into the back of the room by then, arms crossed, smirking. When our eyes met, he tilted his head slightly, as if daring me to continue. "So I did. Mr. Cole claims I owe him. Maybe I do, but not in dollars. I owe him thanks, because without his greed, this place might never have existed. He taught me that the fastest way to bankrupt a soul is to convince it that money measures its value." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters leaned forward, pens moving furiously. I gestured toward the people seated in the front rows, men and women who'd once been lost to debt, addiction, homelessness. "These people," I said, "are the real proof. They've paid every debt that ever mattered, in gratitude, in growth, in grace." Applause began softly, then grew louder. Laura was crying now, not out of fear, but pride. Cole's smirk faltered. He turned and slipped out before the questions began. That night, news stations ran the full speech. Within 24 hours, the same outlets that had questioned me were running new headlines. "Architect turns debt into hope. The truth behind Project Mercy. Grace Turner Foundation inspires nationwide support." Cole's bank issued a statement denying any connection to the claims. In his world, reputation was everything, and his had just collapsed under its own arrogance. A week later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside, A single line in unfamiliar handwriting. Sometimes you win by losing what never mattered. No signature, no name. But I knew it was from him. Even men like Cole know when they've been outbuilt. Laura visited my office the next day. She placed the newspaper on my desk and smiled. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied. "We did it. Every person who refused to let greed define them." She squeezed my hand. Mom would have been proud. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw grace in every part of her expression. "I think she already is," I said softly. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I walked down to the lake alone. The sunset burned orange across the water. For the first time in a long while, I felt no weight. No anger, no unfinished lesson, just quiet completion. I whispered into the wind. We didn't fight him with power, Grace. We fought him with peace. And peace, I realized, was the loudest victory of all. Some lessons take years to understand. Others, a lifetime. And then there are the ones that wait for silence. Lessons that only reveal themselves when the noise of ambition, fear, and pride finally dies down. That was the lesson Grace left me. It was 3 weeks after the press conference. The foundation was busier than ever. Donations arriving daily, volunteers doubling, letters pouring in from strangers who'd been moved by our story. Laura was thriving as program director. Evan, as I later learned through Clara, had checked himself into a recovery and work program in Chicago. And as for Cole, he'd quietly resigned from his firm, replaced by a younger man who, for all I knew, might someday learn what greed costs. Peace had returned, not the fragile kind, but the sturdy, lived-in kind that comes from survival. And yet, even in that calm, I could feel something unfinished, a quiet echo calling from the past. One evening, as the sun lowered over Willow Creek, Laura found me in the workshop, sorting through old blueprints. "Dad," she said softly, "there's something you should see." She held a small leather-bound notebook, faded, worn, familiar. Grace's handwriting peeked out along the edges. "I found it in Mom's old sewing box," Laura said. "I think she meant for you to have it." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The last time I'd seen that notebook was the week before Grace died. She'd been sitting by the window, scribbling notes between long pauses, lost in thought. When I'd asked what she was writing, she'd only smiled and said, "My final project." I opened the notebook carefully. Her handwriting flowed across the pages like music, graceful, precise, unhurried. At the top of the first page, she'd written, "For Henry. When the building is finished, don't forget to step outside and look at it." I smiled faintly. That was her humor. Gentle and wise, even when serious. I kept reading. "You've always built things to last, Henry. But remember, the point of a home isn't permanence. It's peace. One day you'll build something that doesn't need walls. You'll build people. And when you do, that will be your masterpiece." Page after page, she'd written her reflections, not on life or death, but on forgiveness. Each line felt like a whisper across time. "You can't fix people, Henry, but you can give them the tools to fix themselves. If love is the blueprint, mercy is the material. The world doesn't need more architects, it needs rebuilders." I felt my throat tighten as I turned to the final entry. The ink was faint, her handwriting weaker, as if written in her last days. "If you ever wonder whether you did enough, remember this. The foundation we leave behind isn't measured in stone or wood. It's in the hearts that keep standing after we're gone." Beneath it, she'd drawn a small circle, the same symbol she'd used for the foundation garden layout, and beside it, 3 words written in trembling script: "Project Mercy, complete." I closed the notebook and sat there for a long time. The smell of cedar and dust filled the room, and through the window I could hear the laughter of children playing outside. It was as if she'd timed this moment perfectly. Not too soon, not too late. Laura sat beside me quietly. "She knew," she said softly. She knew what you'd build. She always did, I whispered. I turned to her and smiled. You know, your mother was the real architect. I just built what she designed. We walked together down to the chapel by the lake. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and rose. Inside, the evening light spilled across the wooden benches and danced on the stained glass panels. Laura placed the notebook on the altar beneath Grace's photo, the same one we'd chosen years ago. She'd want it here, Laura said. I nodded. And so do I. We stood there in silence, watching the light shift and fade. The reflection of the lake rippled through the window, scattering patterns across the floor, like pieces of Grace's soul, still alive in the world she'd shaped. That night, I sat on the porch, alone. The air was cool, the stars bright and close. I held my journal, turned to the last blank page, and wrote slowly. Grace, you were right. Mercy doesn't fix people. It gives them space to rebuild. You taught me that peace isn't found in silence. It's found in surrender. I finally stepped outside and I see the building now. It's beautiful. I set the pen down and closed the book. A single tear rolled down my cheek, not of grief, but of gratitude. The lesson was complete. When I went to bed that night, the world felt lighter. For the first time in years, I slept without dreams, just stillness. And in that stillness, I could almost hear Grace's voice again, soft and certain. Now, Henry, rest. When I was young, I believed buildings made people safe. I thought the right design, the right balance of steel and symmetry could hold the world together. Now, standing on the porch of the Grace Turner Foundation, I know better. It's not buildings that hold people. It's love, the kind that's earned through forgiveness, through mercy, through the quiet courage to start again. The years I spent building towers in cities gave me status, but not peace. The year I spent disappearing gave me both. And as I look back now, I understand that the truest blueprints are the ones drawn in the heart, not on paper. The foundation had grown beyond what I had imagined. The cottages were full. Children laughed by the lake every morning. Laura had started a mentorship program, teaching young people the same values her mother lived by. Empathy, dignity, gratitude. Even the garden planted in a circle had become a symbol for everything we stood for. No corners, no hierarchy, only connection. One Sunday morning, as volunteers gathered for breakfast, Laura announced a surprise. She stood by the large oak table, sunlight pouring over her like a benediction. Everyone, she began, today marks the first anniversary of the Foundation's official launch, and I want to dedicate something, not just to my parents, but to everyone who's ever believed that mercy is stronger than money. She gestured to the far wall. A white cloth covered a plaque. She pulled it down, revealing a bronze inscription, "The house that love built, in memory of Grace Turner, and in honor of Henry Dawson." Applause filled the room. I felt my throat tighten as she turned to me, eyes glistening. "Dad," she said softly, "you once told me that love has to cost something to be real. Well, we've paid for it, and now it belongs to everyone." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my heart too full for words. After breakfast, I walked out to the lake. The water shimmered in the late morning sun. In the distance, the children were building something near the dock, a small wooden playhouse they'd designed themselves. It was crooked, imperfect, beautiful. One of them ran up to me, a boy named Theo. "Mr. Dawson," he said, breathless, "do you think it'll fall?" I smiled. "Everything falls once, Theo. The trick is learning how to build it back stronger." He grinned and ran back to his friends, shouting my words like they were gospel. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with Laura. She had Grace's notebook open on her lap, reading the last line again. Project Mercy, complete. "She really planned everything," Laura said softly. "She did," I replied, "but she didn't do it for me. She did it for you, for us." Laura turned to me. What about you, Dad? What do you want now? I looked at the horizon and the line where water met sky. For the first time, I said, I don't want anything. I just want to keep giving. She smiled. Then you're not retiring. Retirement is for those who stop building, I said with a chuckle. I just changed what I build. As evening settled in, the foundation lights flickered on one by one. Warm, amber, welcoming. The air smelled of fresh bread and sawdust again, just like it had on the day Laura first arrived here. Everything felt full, complete, alive. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, letting the sound of laughter and wind fill the spaces where loneliness used to live. And somewhere in that stillness, I heard Grace again, not as a memory, but as presence. You see, Henry, the house stood after all. I opened my eyes, smiled, and whispered, Yes, Grace, it's standing. Because it was never made of walls. It was made of us. The next morning, a small envelope appeared on my workbench. No one knew who had left it. Inside, a folded note. Thank you for teaching me what debt really means. Evan! I stared at the handwriting for a long time. Then I smiled and placed the note beside Grace's notebook. 2 stories, 2 redemptions, both finished in the same house. The following week, a storm rolled across Willow Creek. Heavy rain pounded the roof all night, but the buildings held. Not a single leak. In the morning, the sun broke through the clouds, and the air smelled like new beginnings. I stepped outside, looked at the cottages glistening under the rainwater, and whispered to myself, the storm tested the walls, but love built the foundation. That's the secret, I think, to a life well lived. Not avoiding storms, but building something that can stand through them. I used to measure my worth by blueprints and budgets. Now I measure it by peace. And so, if anyone ever asks what Project Mercy was truly about, I'll tell them this. It wasn't about saving anyone. It was about reminding them they were never broken to begin with. They just needed a place to remember their strength. And that's what this house became. The house that love. Built. Some debts can't be paid. They have to be understood. Dad! I sealed it, placed it on her photo, and packed a small bag. The clock read 2:13 a.m. when I left. The house didn't creak, didn't protest. It just watched quietly, as if it knew I wasn't leaving in anger, just retreating for clarity. By dawn, my car was miles away from the city. I didn't know exactly where I was going, only that I was headed somewhere Grace would approve of, someplace quiet enough to think, far enough to let absence speak louder than presence. I wasn't disappearing out of shame. I was giving them what they'd refused to learn, the silence of consequence.